The day that inheritance lawyer, he had these cold, cold fingers. When he pressed that will into my trembling hands, that was the day my world just shattered. Like those porcelain teacups Vivienne used to throw at my bedroom door when she was angry. But wait, let me start where every good revenge story should actually begin. At the moment I stopped being a human being in her eyes, I was 7 years old when my father brought her into our estate in Connecticut. She arrived like spring itself, blonde hair catching the afternoon light, designer heels clicking against the marble floors with so much confidence. She knew she belonged there. My father looked at her like she was his salvation. I just looked at her the way children look at anything new, with a cautious, hopeful kind of curiosity. The sun was streaming through the breakfast room windows that morning. I remember it because it was the last morning I would see sunlight without consequence. For the next 13 years, she is so pale, that is what Vivienne said. Her voice had this pitch of concern that sounds caring to adults but lands differently on a child. She was standing behind my father's chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Richard," she asked, "has she always been this translucent?" My father set down his coffee cup. The clink of porcelain against the saucer felt louder than it should have been. "Emily has a condition," he said, and I heard something in his voice I had never heard before. "Shame, albinism. It is genetic." Her mother. Oh, Vivienne's hand moved to her throat, a gesture of delicate horror, so she cannot go outside. "The sun would. It is manageable," my father said quickly. "Sunday protection factor, protective clothing, regular checkups, but the risk." Vivienne's eyes met mine across the table, and in that second before she smiled, I saw something that made my stomach turn cold. "You poor thing," she said. "It must be so frightening." It was not frightening. I had lived with it my entire life. I knew the drill: high protection, wide-brimmed hats, ultraviolet blocking windows in the car. My mother had made it feel normal, natural, just another part of who I was, like being left-handed. But Vivienne looked at me like I was a tragedy waiting to happen. Within 3 months, she had convinced him I was at risk. Within 6 months, she had specialists lined up. Within a year, my father had signed papers. So many papers. They put Vivienne in charge of my medical care and safety protocols. And then my mother's inheritance came through. The timing was not coincidental. My mother came from old money. When she died in that car accident when I was 6, her trust fund had been locked up, but on my 8th birthday, it was resolved $3 million, placed in a trust that I would inherit at 25. The day that money became real. That was the day Vivienne looked at me and saw an investment. "The specialists are concerned," she told my father over dinner. I was upstairs, supposedly in bed, but the heating vents carried the sound straight to me. "They say even the rays coming through windows could be dangerous, and the other children at school. You know how cruel they can be, the staring, the questions." "She has never complained," my father said, but he sounded weak. "Of course she has not. She is a brave little girl. I heard the sound of wine being poured." "But is it fair to make her brave? We could give her a safe, controlled environment. The Eastern Wing, Richard, we could convert those rooms, no windows, everything she needs. She would be safe. The Eastern Wing, 3 rooms on the ground floor, dark, quiet, away from everything." "That seems extreme," my father said. "Cancer is extreme." Vivienne's voice sharpened. "I am offering her safety." That word, safety, she used it like a weapon. And my father, he surrendered. I was moved to the Eastern Wing 3 weeks later. At first, it was not a prison. My father visited every evening. But visits become routine. Routine becomes obligation, and burdens, eventually they get forgotten. By the time I was 10, his visits were twice a week. By 12, he would just stand outside my door. I could see his shadow under the crack, and then he would walk away without knocking. Vivienne had skillfully convinced him that my condition was worsening, that I preferred the dark. None of it was true. but it was documented in files she controlled. I was disappearing. Not physically. I was there, eating the meals left outside my door, but I was disappearing from the world. I would have continued fading into nothing except for one thing. The walls were thin. Well, not the walls. The ventilation system was old. And at night, I could hear everything. I heard Vivienne talking to her lawyer about maximizing access to my trust. I heard her laughing with friends about how convenient it all was. I heard her tell my father that I had asked not to see him. I never said that, and I heard something else. I was 14 when I heard her on the phone with someone named Marcus. The original will, she said, is in the safety deposit box at First National. But the new will, the one we filed last month, it supersedes everything when the time comes. The trust reverts to me. And if anything happens to her before then, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Vivienne was not keeping me hidden to protect me. She was positioning herself to inherit everything, whether I lived to 25 or not. That night, I stopped being a victim. I had no computer, no phone, but I had time, and I had the ability to listen, to piece together every whispered secret, and I had a tutor. Mrs. Chen was 73, a retired law professor. Vivienne hired her because she was cheap, but Mrs. Chen had a moral compass. She noticed things. She noticed I was not sick. She started bringing me different books. Legal textbooks hidden inside magazines, and once a small voice recorder. Document everything, she whispered, and I did. For 4 years, I documented every lie. I learned my father's company was struggling. I learned Vivienne was isolating him. I learned she had a pattern. I was not the first. There had been another man before my father, another wealthy widower, another accident. I had names now, dates, bank account numbers, and I had a plan. Before I go further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been the smartest person in the room but invisible because of your appearance or your age? Have you ever watched people underestimate you, only to realize too late that you were 3 steps ahead? If you have ever felt erased or hidden, you are not alone. This channel is for people like us, the ones who turn silence into strategy. Drop a comment and let me know your story. Sometimes the most powerful voices come from the people everyone forgot were listening. Subscribe if this resonates. This is your sanctuary. When I turned 18, I would legally be an adult. I would have some access to my money, enough to hire lawyers, enough to disappear. But I needed one more thing. I needed my father's will, the original one. I spent 6 months planning, memorizing her routines, finding where she kept her keys. And then, 3 weeks after my birthday, while she was at the spa and my father was at the office, I walked out of my room for the first time in 6 years. My legs shook. The hallway was impossibly bright. I had to stop every few steps. I found her study. I found her purse. I found the key. And then, I did something that seemed insane. I put everything back, exactly as it was. And I went back to my room, because I was not ready yet. If I ran then, she would claim I was unstable, that I needed to be locked away for my own safety. I had heard her discuss this backup plan, so I waited. I documented, I prepared, I turned my prison into my war room. The thing about being locked away is that people forget you are capable of anything beyond survival. They think darkness makes you weak. They think isolation breaks your spirit. They are wrong. Darkness, it teaches you to see without your eyes. And isolation, well, it teaches you to think without any distractions. And time gives you something way more dangerous than just strength. It gives you patience. I spent the next 3 years becoming someone Vivienne could not predict. Mrs. Chen. She became more than my tutor. She became my accomplice. We never actually used that word. But that is what she was. When I turned 19, she quietly helped me set up a post office box. When I turned 20, she brought me a laptop. It was old and refurbished, and we paid for it in cash. She taught me how to access the internet through her mobile hotspot during our so-called lessons. Vivian never suspected a thing. Why would she? I was still the pale, docile girl who took her meals silently. I was like a ghost who had forgotten. It was dead. But ghosts can learn, and I was learning everything. I learned that my father's business had failed completely 2 years ago. Vivian had convinced him to sign over power of attorney during what she called his depression. She had systematically liquidated everything, selling assets, closing accounts, transferring funds to offshore accounts. I tracked it all through the documents she discussed with her lawyer, Marcus. I learned that this house, my childhood home, was now entirely in Vivian's name. My father had signed the deed over 18 months ago. He actually believed it was for my future. And then I learned my father was sick, really sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed 8 months ago, and the prognosis was poor. Vivian had not told me. She had not told anyone. She was just waiting for him to die so she could execute the final phase. On a Tuesday night in March, just 3 weeks before my 21st birthday, I heard her on the phone with Marcus again. My father was in the hospital. I had heard the ambulance earlier, heard Vivian's practiced sobs as she called the relatives. She thought she was alone in the house. He signed everything last week, she said. Her voice had none of that grief she had performed earlier. When he passes, Emily's trust fund transfers to me as her permanent guardian. The doctors say weeks, maybe a month, and Emily. That was Marcus. I could hear him through the phone, tinny, but clear. Emily's medical condition has been deteriorating. Vivian's tone was clinical, rehearsed. A care facility specializing in severe photophobia and psychological trauma. Very private, very expensive, the kind of place where patients often do not. Well, they do not respond well to treatment. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked. "I am not doing anything," Vivian said. I could practically hear the smile in her voice. "I am simply ensuring she gets the care she needs. If that care happens to be in a facility where patients experience tragic complications, well, that is medicine. Is it not? Unpredictable? She was going to kill me. Not directly, nothing so crude as that. But she was going to lock me away until I died quietly and conveniently." I sat in the dark, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from making a sound. And I felt something shift inside me. It was not fear. Not anymore. It was fury, cold, crystalline, absolute fury. That night, I made my final preparations. This was not about escape anymore. This was about justice. I had copies of everything: recorded conversations, financial documents, emails, medical records that showed I was never sick. I had the names of her previous victims. 2 other wealthy men, both dead under suspicious circumstances. I had paper trails of money flowing from my trust into her private accounts. And I had something else. I had my father's original will, the one he wrote before Vivian entered our lives. Mrs. Chen had helped me access the safety deposit box 3 months ago. We did it legally since I was 18. The bank had required Vivian's signature, so Mrs. Chen, well, she forged it. She said she was not proud of it, but sometimes the law needs help doing what is right. The original will left everything to me immediately upon his death, and it said no other will would be valid unless I personally agreed to the changes. I had never agreed to anything. Every document she made him sign was worthless. My father died on April 3rd. I heard her call the hospital. I heard her arrange the funeral. She never came to tell me. In her story, I was too fragile to handle the news, but I attended that funeral. I walked in wearing a black dress and sunglasses. It was medically appropriate for the albinism, sure. But it was also perfect for hiding the fact that I had not cried. The church fell silent. Nobody had seen me in 13 years. Vivian was at the front, playing the grieving widow. She looked up when the whispers started, and our eyes met. For a moment, just one moment, her mask slipped. I saw shock, then calculation, then maybe even fear. "Emily," she said. She moved toward me with her arms outstretched. "Sweetheart, you should not be here, the light, the crowd. Let me take you home." I simply said that I was not going anywhere. I kept it quiet and firm. "Emily, you are not well," she whispered. "You are confused, the grief. I am not confused," I told her, "and I am not sick. I never was." I pulled out an envelope. Inside were copies of everything, the recordings, the financial documents, the original will. I handed it to the funeral director, a man who had known my father for 20 years, and then I produced a second envelope. That one was for the police. What followed was not like a movie. Real justice rarely is. There were no screaming confrontations. Instead, there were lawyers. So many lawyers. There were police investigations that took months, forensic accountants who traced every dollar she had stolen. At this point, I have to ask you, what would you do when the people who were supposed to protect you? Well, when they betray you instead, would you try to rebuild, or would you bury them in the past they created? Have you ever held on to evidence, just waiting for the perfect moment? Write it in the comments. I read every single one. This community is for everyone who has been silenced or underestimated. If that is you, you belong here. Subscribe, because we are building something powerful together. A place where the quiet ones finally get heard. Through it all, I sat in a sun-filled apartment. I waited. The house was frozen in legal limbo. Vivienne was forbidden from even entering it. She was living in a tiny rented apartment downtown, her assets frozen, her friends suddenly too busy to take her calls. I could have sent her to prison. Fraud, embezzlement, false imprisonment. But I did not want that kind of revenge. Prison is finite. I wanted her to understand what she had taken from me. I wanted her to feel it every single day. The estate was settled 9 months later. The original will was upheld. Everything reverted to me, and then I did something she never expected. I bought her out. I offered her a settlement. She could fight me in court for years and lose, or she could take a one-time payment. It was enough to live on modestly for the rest of her life. It was not enough for the luxury she wanted, not even close, but it was enough to survive. She took it. She had no choice. The day the final papers were signed, I went back to the house. My house, the eastern wing, those 3 rooms that had been my prison, I had them completely renovated. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows. I did not need to hide from the sun anymore. I had learned to manage my condition the way my mother had taught me. And in the main living room, I installed a single photograph. It was my mother, young and alive, holding me as an infant, both of us standing in the sunlight. Vivienne came to collect her last things 3 weeks later. I was sitting by the window when she arrived, the same window she had kept permanently curtained and locked. Now it was open. Sunlight poured across the floor, warming my skin, catching the white blonde of my hair. She stood in the doorway. She looked smaller somehow. Older, her designer clothes were gone. Her hair was different. The roots were showing. She looked at me. I looked at her. "The boxes are in the hallway," I said. "Just the things that are yours." She did not move. Then she started to say that she never meant to. But I stopped her. "No," I said. "You do not get to rewrite this. Not the story. Not the ending." I stood up and held out a piece of paper. The deed to the house. My name was on it. Legal, final. "This is what you spent 13 years trying to steal," I told her. "You locked me in the dark for this. You were ready to kill me to keep it." I placed the deed on the table, and now it is mine. It was always mine. You just borrowed time. I stood in the doorway, backlit by all that sunshine she had forbidden, and watched her load her remaining life into a trunk. She looked back once. I did not wave. I did not smile. I just watched. Then I closed the door. I locked it and I walked back to my living room. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Mrs. Chen. She said she was proud of me, that my mother would be too. I looked at the photograph on the wall, and for the first time in 13 years, I cried, not from pain, but from relief, from freedom, Some battles are not won with violence. They are won by surviving long enough to outlast the people who tried to bury you, by refusing to stay buried, by standing in the light they swore would destroy you and letting it make you stronger,